Hey everyone, and welcome to Almost Cancelled. I am Peter, that is Connor, and we are going to talk about Lovecraft Country, Season 1, Episode 3. It's called Holy Ghost. So, full spoilers for the episode, as always. This was an interesting one to go into, because obviously we loved Episode 1 quite a bit. Episode 2 was still very good, but definitely showed some problems that weren't in Episode 1. I think Episode 3 did a really good job of kind of solidifying kind of what it is in terms of both sides of what it's presented so far.
That's an interesting way of looking at it. I'm not sure I necessarily agree with that. This felt a lot more like episode 1 overall than 2 for me.
I don't know if I agree with that. I think this is... I mean, I think it's better than episode 2, but I think it's very pulpy. The actual supernatural elements felt very... you know, over the top and supernatural, and
I think that's the key thing for me here. It feels very traditionally supernatural, and there's a lot more of the focus on the actual race issues. So for me, it felt more like the blend that we had in the first episode than I did the second.
Yeah, I think the reason why I don't feel that way is because this one, very early on, characters just kind of accept that there's something creepy going on. Like, Letty, very quickly, is seeing ghosts and paranormal elements around the house. And so what's so funny about it is that the episode kind of, like, it gets into it, and I was kind of thinking, you know, it's almost like, I feel like in a lot of shows I'd be saying, this is, you know, coincidental that, you know, like, and it actually isn't a coincidence. By the end of the episode, there's actually a kind of there's a train of like, you know, circumstance which led her to that house specifically. But
yes,
but it does at face value. It's like, well, this is a bit of a coincidence that after their adventure last time, no, it's actually been at least a couple of weeks, because they've already had the funeral for George. I think
they say it's been about 5 weeks.
5 weeks even. Oh, there you go. And that was interesting. It's kind of funny because the episode started and the episode's got a very specific style. It does this kind of, this day by day, well, it doesn't like every day, but it does this day 1, day 5 kind of thing.
Yeah, it comes up with a big flashcard, but like I say, it skips quite a few days as well.
Yeah, it's doing this kind of, you know, big bombastic kind of horror tone. And at the start of the episode, I was, you know, there's the opening scenes, Letty at church, and she's just kind of crying. This is kind of the what seems to be the signature thing for this show, which is to play a recording of a speech or something like that, and it's played right at the start here. She's kind of, you know, everyone in the church is doing kind of their their I don't even know what you call it, the dancing and all that, and
yeah,
I don't know.
I don't have any better terminology for you on this one.
Enthusiastic preaching, I guess I'll call it.
Sure, yeah.
Where everyone's shouting praise the Lord and all sorts of other things.
Yeah. My church wasn't like that, so can't help you on this one.
Nah. And I never really went to a church, so but it starts with this, and you can sort of, from the way she's reacting in the scene, from the way she's out of it, she's not really paying attention, she's just with her own thoughts. It gives you immediately kind of this, you know, the weight of everything that's just happened to her. As she points out herself later, she literally died and came back, and then obviously everything else on the journey as well. But there is this time jump, and you know, we've already had, you know, the funeral's already happened, because we were speculating last episode that we're going to have an emotional scene where they have to tell Hippolyta about what happened to George. And at the start of the episode, I was thinking, you know, am I disappointed that we've skipped ahead in time? And I think I thought I might be. I didn't necessarily feel it yet, but I thought, oh, maybe by the end of the episode I'm going to be disappointed that we skipped those parts of the beats, those beats in the story. But I wasn't, because as the episode went through, the way it addressed everything I wanted it to do, it sort of done it all in different ways, in more inventive ways even. Yeah,
it didn't do the expected, here's the emotional beat, in the way that you present it as you normally would. It kind of did a handful of different things that it tackled. You did a bit with Tick, a bit with his father, and it tackled a couple of times in different ways that kind of added up to not necessarily better, but different and more unique, certainly.
Yeah, I was very impressed with this episode. I think this episode like I said, kind of solidifies. Like, not that we were kind of in any doubt after episode 1, really, but for me, this kind of like said, hey, this is what this show is, and not that every episode's going to have this day by day thing or whatever, but it tells me that episodes are going to have things, that they're going to do stylistic things in individual episodes. It tells me that the way they tackle the race stuff with the neighbors in this one does feel a bit more akin to some stuff in the first episode. The paranormal stuff feels a bit more like some of the stuff in episode 2. It feels like this episode kind of showed me how good it is at juggling these things.
This is... I stand by more so after this episode that the first 2 felt like a 2-part pilot.
Sure.
And this feels like the first, weekly episode, and I use that more in akin to what we used to have in weekly TV, and that this is what your average episode feels like.
Yeah, without sacrificing the serialized elements, though, which I think is important.
Yeah, and that wasn't to diminish the quality at all, because I think this was an excellent episode. But more just, okay, this is kind of what to expect, I think, each episode going forward, as a rule.
Yeah, but I was very impressed with this episode. I think the quality is off the charts. I couldn't believe how it was juggling the tone of having kind of not silly, ghostly elements. They're kind of over the top in a fun way. The actual paranormal stuff.
Towards the end. When
we get to the ghosts. And it has stuff like just fun gore at one point. Like, that's a thing that we have. But at the same time, we're tackling these other issues. We're tackling very extreme racism in the 50s, and then we're also tackling really sort of in-depth character stuff and character beats for their journeys. There's a couple of points in this episode where I thought the acting was transcending. It was going further and beyond anything we've seen so far. And they're really subtle little moments. They're just little things that are giving me so much character in a plot beat that otherwise in most shows would just kind of be
not necessarily bad, but just the next beat.
Yeah, someone reacted to a thing, the way you'd expect them to. Right, let's move on with our lives. But this wasn't that. I'm thinking specifically when Tick goes to see his father after he leaves, Uncle George's house. And he's not asked to leave. He kind of offers that he has to go. And then, but you can sort of tell that he's saying that because he realizes he's getting on Hippolyta's nerves. That he's as he says later, I've worn out my welcome there. But no one ever actually said that to him. He just picked up on it, which is, again, kind of tying it to Tick's character.
She was never going to kick him out.
Yeah, but Tick's been shown to be very observant and sort of as a critical thinker, so he's observed this. But the moment of acting that I was talking about, though, is that he's with his father, and there's 2 beats in the scene particularly, because he wakes him up because he's kind of like lying there drunk, kind of dreaming away, and he brings up this old story that him and George used to always say. And there's a moment when he's frustrated because his father's not really responding to him. He's kind of just shrugging him off and giving one-word answers. And there's a moment where his father, Montrose, walks out of the room. Just for a minute, he comes back in like right away. But there's a moment where Tick's left on his own for a second, sort of mid-conversation, and he kind of just gets really frustrated. As soon as he knows that his father can't see him, he kind of physically sort of reveals how he's feeling a little bit. And I thought that was a really good moment. And then the other moment is when they start fighting. Not physically, but when they basically get into an argument because Tick feels guilty that he's not told Hippolyta exactly. They've seemingly just told her, oh, this racist sheriff killed George. I mean, from later on, it sounds like they've also told her that they killed the sheriff afterwards. They took care of him, yeah. But they haven't told her the exact details, and Tick doesn't feel comfortable with that. Montrose, when Tick's saying, hey, but if George was here, he would do this, and if George was here, and eventually, and this is right after Tick's asked, like, hey, can I spend a few nights before I go? I need somewhere else to stay. He gets angry, he slams the table, and the way Tick stands up and the way he kind of like backs away, it goes through like fear and then disappointment that he's just the same old father that he always knew, and then anger, and then almost fear again. Fear that he, not so much that he's scared of his dad and what his dad might do to him, more that he's scared of what he might do in defense. This conflict isn't the first time this conflict's happened. This is the same thing happening again, and everything in his body language told me that. I thought the performance here was fantastic.
Yeah, there's a handful of these moments from, I'd say, both our leads. Letty has a couple as well. Some of the ones that stood out were pretty much whenever she had a confrontation with all the white guys, and she's always just presented as strong in front of them, right? And wouldn't let them see any weakness, whatever. But once the door shut, or she was on her own, she would change. Not always necessarily to fear or weakness. Sometimes she would double down on the determination. But it was the small moments of just the change once it was behind closed doors that were different throughout the episode. It wasn't just one moment. It was kind of this evolution of the feeling.
Yeah. Most of our scenes were tick as well. That's the thing when you have two leads that are both very good. As we're in a scene together, it tends to go very well.
They've got great chemistry, obviously. I think one of the best little moments in terms of their beats together is near the start of the episode, when the housewarming party's going on, and everything starts kicking off with all the white neighbors, and Tick said he's about to go. He told his boss he'd be gone for like a few days, a month ago or whatever it was, and then it all starts, and he just kind of leans there and goes, "Guess I'll be sticking around a bit longer."
Yeah, that's the moment when they go outside. That's the horns are all going off in the car, and it's just the three neighbours in their cars, and they've all got bricks next on, strapped to the horn, so they're just going to go off indefinitely. And they're all standing on the porch, and that's the moment where Tick says, maybe I'll stick around a little bit longer. So the actual plot of the episode is that Letty's bought this house for her and her sister, which was kind of hinted at something she wanted to do in the first episode, and she doesn't reveal till later on in the episode that she afforded, because her sister's even like you can't afford this. How did you?
I'm really glad it addressed this because early on I was like, weren't you like crazy poor, like begging to stay anywhere because you had no money whatsoever?
Yeah, and I think what you're learning here from this show is to trust it, because this is not the only thing I would say. Much like me saying, "Oh, is it strange that they've skipped over those beats?" And by the end of the episode, it was not even a concern. Like they knew what they were doing.
Even down to just the house feeling coincidental, I think, which is a pretty major one. But all of these things, I'm questioning it because it feels like we've missed information. Obviously, we missed a few weeks. I think at this point of the episode, I wasn't sure how long it had been, and I was like, how much did we miss? What's changed? And then, obviously, as the episode goes on, it does unfold that information quite naturally to us.
Yeah. So they move in, and she's going to make it sort of a boarding house. And the white neighborhood that she's moved into obviously is not particularly happy about it, and conflict arises from that. But there's also ghosts creeping about the house. A elevator that's not working that almost takes her head off, and that's a nice little bit of foreshadowing for later on when it actually does take someone's head off, and it is glorious.
It is indeed.
Yes. So yeah, there's a lot going on in this episode, and you have kind of the race stuff. Obviously is at face value is the stuff with the neighbors, but you also have even the history of the house and why the ghosts are here. You have the ghost of the mad scientist, the mad KKK scientist.
This was very Lovecraft in specific. Obviously you've got the monster side of Lovecraft horror, but he loved doing the crazy doctor experiments too far.
Yeah. So you have him, but you also have all the people that he worked on, the ghosts of them. The most notable one is probably the basketball player with the baby head. Yeah,
which I thought the effect looked a little off at times on that one.
I think it worked that it was off though, because it was such a surreal.
It was weird
concept. Yeah. And I said baseball player because there was also a baseball player ghost, but this was kind of the opposite. It was like a. Well, it wasn't the opposite. That's not true. It was still like a kid's head, but it wasn't a baby. It was like a I don't know, a 10-year-old's head or something like that on like an older body. Like there was it clearly. Do you know what I like about that? I like that clearly this was like a sort of chain of like the same thing. Like clearly he was trying to achieve whatever crazy thing he was trying to do with kid heads and adult bodies, but he was trying to achieve something. And
I mean, look, mad scientists are often terrible, but they do usually have specific goals in mind, as a rule.
Could you tell me what the specific goal of this was?
No, I don't know what his goal is, but I'm sure he had a very specific goal. In their heads, it's a very specific and noble purpose.
Yeah, but yeah, the race stuff also plays into this because the history it ties to the family, to the family that Tick's connected to. That's why this ended up, because the money didn't come from inheritance from her mother, as she thinks. It came from what was her face, Christina, I would say. Yes, Christina,
who I have decided is giving me a lot of Emma Stone vibes.
Sure.
You'll see it now that I've said that. It's one of those things. There was just every so often she reminded me of someone. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, and that's who it is.
I don't know. I just know from the Neon Demon. So
I mean, fair enough, but specifically, that's who she's been reminding me of.
yeah, so that's revealed later on, and I kind of like the fact that she thinks this money comes from her mother, though, leads to a great confrontation with her sister, where her sister really loses her shit because, and Joe is so good about this, is that again, this is something that in a lesser show would feel just plucked out of nowhere, but because episode 1 clearly set up the idea that Letty's kind of the child who's the troublesome one, who's the least reliable, who didn't even show up to her mother's funeral, which is brought up again in this, is like...
It's a pretty big thing, to be fair.
You didn't go to your funeral, you don't use her last name, and yet all of the money was left to you. And it is kind of this thing, yeah, that would be very questionable. And again, it makes sense at the end because it's someone was trying to get her in that house.
It does. I appreciate, though, even before that bit at the end, in this scene, it contextualizes it enough that I was going to buy it anyway, because, she's like... I don't know what the point of this was, because that woman never did anything that didn't, have some personal gain for her. So she assumes that this is some plot from beyond the grave, essentially, that her mother's, put into action. So there's enough there. Okay, she's being manipulative somehow. If under the assumption that the money was from the mother at that point.
No, I agree. I didn't I wasn't questioning this. Once it got to this scene, I was like, okay, that's fine. I'll accept this at face value. But obviously there was more to it by the end, and it explained why she ended up in this house with this mad scientist who did come from the order of whatever. I keep forgetting the name of it, but he was like a excommunicated member because he was stealing pages out the book of spells. And would you believe it? The rich white woman's goal is to gain more power by getting more magic spells, so she can rule the world or something. More on that later, I guess.
Yeah, we don't know what her goals exactly are.
Well, it's to get more power, which, people...
I mean, long-term goals.
Yeah, but people in power just always seem to want more power. And that scene at the end, where Tech tries to confront her and holds her up at gunpoint, and then he seemingly just can't do it. And it's not so much that he's trying to shoot her yet, because it's not like... Because we know Tech's not like a guy who just would immediately just shoot her point blank, right? But he immediately is not in control. He can't control his hand. And she explains that, most sorcerers don't actually even make a spell in their lifetime. They just take the others that have been created. And those who do make a new spell, will make one in their whole life. And her father's claim was the invulnerability, which he then explains that they had to kind of drop for the ritual. So he is dead. It's not like he's going to, pop up.
But it explains why she's okay, because she didn't drop the spell.
Oh no, she's clearly using it right now. Clearly he can't do anything because she's got this spell to protect her.
It's an interesting mechanic of the way the spell works, right? It won't necessarily just stop the bullet, but it'll stop, it wouldn't stop it in midair, is what I mean by that. It
doesn't look like in your face supernatural. Like, it probably feels it to Tech because he feels like he can't do something, but it just looks like he can't do it. Which feels like maybe it's to a third party. It's like, oh, maybe it's psychological. He just doesn't have the cojones to do it or something. Like, well, that's not really what it is, but that's what it'll just look like to an observer. It looks.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of the thing in the third season of Dark, of the way things are going to happen will happen, and there's no avoiding that, and things will just find a way. As it is here, things will just find a way not to hurt her.
Yeah, but then of course you have the metaphor here as well, which I think is very poignant.
Yeah,
is the idea, because even the line she really points out as she's walking out, saying, "Hey, you can't be." And I loved it as she's explaining the spell, because he's closed all the blinds in this little, it's like a little office store kind of thing, where the fake lawyer was that gave Letty the money, and he closed all the blinds. And as she's explaining this, as he's standing there with the gun, she's opening them all, and it's kind of like, no, I want people to see this because you can't go around killing white women. How's that going to look? And she sort of walks out, and it sort of leaves it on that point. But the idea that there is literally this power that she has that stops him from being able to retaliate, and it's kind of like this supernatural version of a real thing. This idea of the consequences of a black on white violence. Yeah. It's because of the system, because of the police force, all these things. Is this dangerous? So is that the idea of turning that into an actual, not superpower, but something that's actually manifested into a physical thing, is, it's good writing. It's just this, it's what you do in these types of things. So it continues to do. I mean, we've skipped over all the main plot to get to that scene, but because there's a lot of good stuff. I love the filmmaking. There's two scenes early on in the episode where they do not necessarily oneers. I think one of them was more of a oneer, but it's when we first cut back to the house when she's moved in with some people and they're moving in like a piano and things, and it's her going around. Letty's going around with her camera. And she's talking to people, and she like talks to like 3 or 4 different tenants as she's like going down the stairs, and her sister's there as well, and it's all this quick back and forth as she's walking around, and it's all this sense of energy, it's all this sense of life. Everything's hustling and bustling, everything's moving around, everyone's doing things, and it feels so energetic. And then the contrast to that is that this ends more or less with Tick showing up, and that kind of stops her in her tracks. It's like, oh, everything just stopped because Tick, the one she's kind of into, and she's not seen him in a few weeks here. He's here to say goodbye, basically. And obviously, at the end of this scene is when we have the cars outside. And again, everything in the house is all this full of life. Everything's moving around. At least that's what she wants to feel, and that's how she's like trying to like keep up the appearance of. Maybe it's different when she's on her own, but when she's around other people, she's got this energy and everything's so full of life. But when you get outside and you have the racist guys with the cars, all of a sudden, all the shots are very static. They're very stilted. They're very harsh.
Everything's it has that feeling of being on edge, right?
Yeah.
And being careful.
Yeah, and then the other one, or I think it just kind of solidifies this point, is the party where she's going around with the picture, and there is a oneer at one point that it sort of has her come back in with when she's refilled the picture, and she sort of dances with someone for a second, and her sister's there singing, and it's this very energetic flowing around. It feels alive. It feels like this thing is going on, which again kind of contrasts with the ghost thing. Yeah,
it does. Yeah, I hadn't really thought of that specific point, but you're right. Yeah, it's interesting.
No, there's little bits of filmmaking in there. I thought the use of music in this episode was especially good as well. There was like several points where I thought the music really added a lot to the scene. I'm thinking when she like basically calls upon the power of all the ghosts who were victims here. It says you're not quite dead yet. You can still help fight this bastard. And some of the ghosts themselves, I thought. One of the first ones we see is like the one who's like sticking her head up at the side of the bed, and I thought because it was in broad daylight, it actually had the kind of a creepy feeling to it, despite the fact that you've seen this kind of visual a lot. It looked kind of different than normal.
Yeah, is that the one that it kind of played it like the dream sequence at the start?
Yeah, she sat over it because I think the first thing you see actually is the hands sort of pulling the covers.
Yeah, because it looked like a disembodied hand.
Yeah, so it was just hands. It was literally just hands.
It was just hands. Okay. Because I thought it was just hands. I was like, what the hell's going on here? And then we see the woman at the side of the bed, and I went, oh, okay, maybe it was just the way it was shot, and the rest of it was off camera essentially.
No. Well, I say just hands. It was like the forearms as well. They were kind of cut off just like below the elbow, seemingly.
Yeah. It was a good visual.
But I think she is missing when you see her later on. When all the ghosts come together, I think she is missing an arm. So I think the idea is that she's still controlling her arm. It's just separate.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. Honestly, the only moment I didn't really like from the ghosts, to be honest, just because it felt kind of like that typical movie cheesiness, right? Whereas the rest of them all felt kind of like weird and inspired and a little bit different. Was probably the face coming out of the photographs, and it was like, get out of my house. That was the only one I was kind of like, it's a bit generic, whatever.
Yeah, but 1 out of, I don't know, 7 or 8 moments like that.
Oh yeah, for sure. I can't complain. In fact, one of my favorites was when the scientist, when the mad scientist Epstein, I don't know, did they pick that name intentionally? I mean,
possibly.
Yeah. But it's when he possesses Tick, and it's sort of like his face is kind of like rapidly moving through Tick's head, and it's
Joe, when you said there was one you didn't like, I was like, please don't say the possession, please don't, because is
I love that.
Potentially the cheesiest one, if you don't pull it off right.
Oh sure, no, I thought the scene worked really well. I thought it was good.
Yeah, no, I do as well. I thought it was great, and it was, like I say, it was my favorite one as well. But when you said there was one that didn't work, I think this one rides a really fine line, where this would be really easy to tip over into no, this is cheesy now.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of this stuff, in this episode specifically, the supernatural stuff, the ghosts, I think it is really easy to tip. It is a fine line because, it makes me think of a lot of movies I don't like. It makes me think of 13 Ghosts. I think that movie's trash, right? But but in the sense that you've got all these different ghosts. But I think, you know, something as simple as having all these grounded characters who are experiencing the story, who it does help that we already care about, that we've already like become attached to, that there is genuinely good drama with those characters throughout the episode. So just stuff as simple as, I mean, just think of Tick and Letty's relationship and how, you know, at one point when she's scared Ellie on, and he's helping her look in the basement. You know, she holds his hand and he kind of pulls away and he's kind of standoffish. And at least to the scene where she's dancing with some other guy and they make eye contact and it's kind of awkward. And at least to kind of, you know, I was surprised there was a sex scene in this episode. I did not expect it to happen like this, and I did not expect it to happen this early. But again, it's one of those things where if it had been this romantic thing where there was a love song playing and they were like, you know, in bed and there was candles, I'd have probably hated it. But because it's this kind of awkward thing in the bathroom, and then afterwards, immediately, there's all these like things that make it interesting. And not even just the blood, where she's kind of like, oh, I didn't realize it was on my period. And then later on, she reveals it was her first time. And I love his reaction to that, because he's like, first time for what? Not even, like, he's not expecting that.
Because, and again, you got to remember earlier at the party scene, there's the other guy who talks about being into her. And there's the implication that maybe she had a reputation when they were younger.
I don't know if I guess I got a reputation, but certainly the way he phrased it, like he said, I think he said he used to wrestle with her, I think was the line he had. And it's the sort of thing where that can mean sex, but they're also teenagers, so it could just mean, you know, anything before sex. Like, you know.
It could be, or it was just this guy, you know, talking up shit.
It could be he pecked her in the cheek one day, and this is, you know, he's extrapolating a bit.
Things like that. And Tick didn't look too surprised by this. I thought maybe there was a reputation that she had that just wasn't true, right?
Yeah. But you know, it's kind of wonderful because he plays it off in a sort of natural, oh, that's okay, no big deal. Like, he kind of tries to play it off, and then like, but afterwards when he leaves, she starts crying, and I think the awkwardness afterwards made it feel so real to me that I was kind of like, no, that was a good scene. Like, it didn't matter that it felt like they were kind of rushing this thing. If anything, they rushed it in a way that it felt like the characters themselves were making a mistake going this quickly. And then afterwards, it felt like they'd made a mistake, and it was like, oh, everything that they just did felt true to what was going on.
No, I agree, and like I say, then revealing the bit later where it was, oh, though this was her first time, added to that feeling of making it weird that it was rushed into, not rushed into, because you know that's not what I wanted for the storytelling, but what seemingly was quicker than we would have expected from the pacing of this particular story.
We're just too used to bad TV. We expect all these. These are all the stumbling blocks that we expect them to you know, fumble over and their face on. And here it's doing all these interesting little things with it. It's just,
they're just not hitting those blocks. Yeah,
it's just good writing and good acting, and voila, this is what we have. We have characters doing things that make sense, and it's not so much about, because so much of other TV shows and movies, it's about getting to the sex scene. You know, not in an explicit way, because most things don't show explicit sex. Just it's about getting to the.
We are on HBO, so getting to the sex scene is something that a lot of their shows can be guilty of.
This wasn't that gratuitous. This was, I mean,
no, this wasn't. Which is why it almost stood out, right? It felt very adult in the sense of, you know we what we're dealing with after and the way it handles it, but it wasn't gratuitous. It
felt more mature because of that, but. You know, most shows, it's about, that's the culmination, you know, no pun intended, but it's the payoff to the build-up of like, oh, well, they want, and they get. This was a beat in the story for whatever the overall story with them is going to be. This wasn't the end goal. This wasn't they're finally together. This was this is kind of a part in the journey to getting them to a point where they're actually comfortable with who each other are and what their relationship is. They're not there yet. Yeah. This is, you know, and that actually felt kind of mature. So
I did. Yeah, and refreshing for TV writing.
Yeah, and it's after this that the racists outside, the neighbours, have the burning cross, and this, you know, and there's so much like driving Letty throughout this episode, and the way she changes from scene to scene, and you know, she literally just had this interaction, this encounter with Tick, that she's obviously feeling very conflicted about. She feels very emotional about, and then immediately this happens outside.
I'm completely on Hippolyta's side. When, you know, she was, you know, the reasons why she was getting a bit annoyed with Tick was things that he did differently to how, you know, George did. After washing up, leaving the cups facing up. What the hell is wrong with you, Tick, you monster?
I thought you were going to make an actual proper character point in there, and you're just complaining about something that you don't like in real life.
I'm completely on her side in this one.
that really wasn't her point. That her point was that her husband left them a certain way and ticked us at the other way. So it's like this little pointer that
it's jarring. Yeah, no, I got that, but I'm with her anyway.
She's not upset. She's not like outraged because the cups are the wrong way up.
She should be.
Yeah. We'll get back to Paula because she has kind of her own little sub thing throughout the episode. But yeah, Ruby's freaking out, thinking, "Oh, like this," because she references another event. She references like another incident. It's going to be like this thing over again.
They bring it up a few times. I think it was a previous instance of someone moving into a white neighborhood.
Yeah. But Letty's had enough, and she grabs a bat. And again, the music really kicks in here, and she smashes all the windows to get rid of the bricks. Because this is the thing, this horn going off constantly. Like every time someone opens a window or a door,
it's just there.
You can hear it, and then it sort of gets muffled again. And you know, the sound of the party is almost like she's having a party just to drown it out. Let's just have some music and stuff, and be loud to get rid of this stupid noise. But you know, everyone kind of goes into action, like Tick and a couple of the other guys like grab shotguns and sort of make sure she's kind of protected as she's doing this. And then it's immediately at the end, Ruby like pulls up in a car and they like, get rid of all the guns and they all get on their knees because they know the police are coming. They know that the neighbors have called the police. Like this is obviously what's going to happen.
They immediately are like, nope, hands up, surrender.
Yeah, and it's not so much that they've specifically done this specific thing before, but more just the idea of like knowing the police are going to be coming for this and what the protocol is for. And
they don't want to be stood there with guns when the police arrive because they know what's going to happen.
Yeah, so it's just this trying to be as safe as possible. There's no guarantees, obviously, but and Letty's taking it on her own, and you know it's one of those things where obviously the neighbors here are super intimidating. It's this kind of like you know this just underlying like racial tension the entire time. But it's one of these things where this episode up until this point was focusing a bit more on the ghosts. It was a bit more about all the ghosts in the house and there's all these things happening that are creepy. She's been looking at the photographs and the face and all that jazz. I mean, nothing happened yet, to be honest. But you know, it was all these little ghost things, and it was or more to the point, it was the relationship stuff with Tick. It was at the party. It was all the other drama that was going on. So you almost didn't forget about it, but it kind of went to the back burner a little bit for a little while.
It made a point of not letting you forget because the horns were always there.
Yeah, there was like
it was in the background.
Yes, but it was that reminder was there, but it was very much not at the forefront. So it felt like it wasn't at the forefront of the episode. And then you have this scene with the cop who, you know, just outright kind of doesn't admit. I mean, it's that sly kind of like, you know, Letty points out, "Hey, I made 21 complaints about my abusive neighbors. Did you get any of those?" And he's like, "Nah, did we get any complaints to the guy up front?" He's like, "Nah, I don't recall, sir. Nah, I don't remember any." And it's just kind of like. There's this was an element with the acting I think you were mentioning earlier, is like just the way she reacts and kind of the sort of the defeated kind of anger on her face.
It's disgust on this one, I'd say. Honestly, these two leads are phenomenal actors, the pair of them.
Yeah, they're both great. So the cop kind of like has the other one like sort of like swerve the car around.
He does that thing where he doesn't even say anything. He just holds onto the handhold in the side of the wall.
Yeah.
And as soon as he does that, you know what's coming.
Yeah, and she probably could grab onto it if she had enough warning time to like, but she's handcuffed, so it's a bit more difficult. Yeah. So she starts, flying around, and she's hitting herself off the side of the car, not to say the car, more of a van, but yeah, but there's a lot of exposition that comes out of this scene about all the victims of this mad scientist were all black. So again, we have this. The racial tension, the racial history kind of coming into it. And it makes a lot of sense.
The name of the house comes up because he questions her about the Winthrop house.
Yeah, and I think, I don't think it's surprising that this reminds me of, a lot of like stories do like the mad Nazi scientist and how they would typically, I mean, they'll experiment on anyone who's not a Nazi basically, but, it would often be Jewish people that they would experiment on and things like that. Yeah. So it doesn't strike me as, that much of a stretch to then imagine someone who becomes from this, racist cult is and this cop is they kind of do the research later. They bring up that hey, it looks kind of like he's probably shadily like taking prisoners and making them or not even prisoners, just people he's arresting and making them disappear at this house so that he's got another subject and so on and so on. So. All this stuff, like it's mixing like pulp horror with this serious stuff so well, and it's bouncing from the tones of like a really serious scene with the race stuff to a really like insightful and like nuancing about romance or character drama to then pulpy like decapitations and ghosts and shit. And it's doing it all without ever feeling like anything's jarring or clashing.
Yeah, it's a wonderful balancing of tones. It is difficult to balance tones like this, especially in something as relatively short as a TV episode, as compared to, like a movie, which is, 2.5 times the length of this sometimes. You got a lot more time to balance these things and kind of go back and forth. Whereas in an hour, you've got to be moving quite quickly to get through them, and it can feel like you're just rushing back and forth between things, stringing beats together. Even in some good TV shows, that they have that feeling at times. But this is doing it really well, in kind of that threading that line through the different things and the tones.
Yeah, but another small point actually on the camera work. I was talking about the feeling alive inside the house compared to the outside. The only time we get a shot from inside another house in the street, like one of the white houses, for lack of a better term, is when the police are arriving, or actually no, I think it's when she's smashing the cars, whatever. It's around that scene.
Yeah.
It's just basically an over the shoulder shot of like a couple in like a house looking, just peering through the curtains.
Yeah.
And just look at the contrast of that. In Letty's house, it's a party where they're not even caring about what's going on the outside, even though they're actively trying to harass them, even though there's active like noise coming from outside to upset them. They're not even caring. They're just trying to be in their own world and enjoy themselves and do whatever. And then you cut to these white neighbors, and they're peering. And again, still camera, completely still. It's kind of leering out the window. It's like obsessed with the other side. It's obsessed with what's going on over there.
Yeah.
It's just the contrast is, in the filmmaking is off the rails. On top of just the obvious, like, the neighbors who have probably the ones who called the police are watching.
Yeah. But it's I don't know. It's nice, like the way the curtain twitching is filmed. It's really close up behind them. It's a little bit different. It does feel almost claustrophobic in a way, where as if I'm sure the way they view this as these terrible racist people is they are being infringed upon. There's people coming into their space and taking away from them.
Can I give you a phrase here?
Please do.
To accentuate what you're saying here, they've got a narrow worldview.
Yeah. So that feeling of the camera being so tight and claustrophobic, even though they're the ones in the wrong, just because for that moment we're in their house, the camera imitates their feeling. I think that's it's really strong stuff.
But once they've done the research, they text like maybe it's time to move out, like maybe it's time to just go. But they do a good job of like giving us the reasons why Letty wants to stay, why she's not going to be run out of the place. She's this is our house. She's going to keep it. So they get like a psychic, I guess, and I felt sorry for our good friend Tim, who does Screams After Midnight with me. He's a big lover of goats, and I couldn't help but think of him as the psychic brings a goat up onto the porch and slits its throat.
Yep, I believe the correct term here would be medium, for the record.
Medium, there you go.
Yeah.
And she then puts little crosses of blood on their foreheads, and because they got a basement, they have essentially a seance where she tries to like get the evil spirit to piss off, and that's when she ends up getting possessed, and Tit gets possessed. As this is happening though, so we can have some fun. The three
and
racists,
it is fun.
Yeah, the three racists, right? And this is the great thing. This is something horror movies do a lot of, is they'll give you an asshole so that when something bad happens to them, you actually kind of enjoy it, right? So the three racists come into the house, they sneak in, and they basically all die one by one. My favourite, of course, is the decapitation. It's the elevator, the stick his head in the shaft, and the elevator goes bleh, and you just.
But you've got the others being like seeing the ghosts and being terrified.
Yeah. It's rather delightful.
It is. It is a lot of fun. I think that's an important keyword here, because it's actively trying to be fun. Amongst all the horrific things of the real life horror, it makes a point of making the supernatural horror have some fun elements to it.
I think that's what's really impressive about this, is that everything we're talking about it doing and juggling, everything it's doing is always intentional. It's never being fun in a goofy way because it's kind of missed the mark, but it's kind of funny because it's silly, or it's never missing the mark and getting an effect that's maybe positive, because there's a lot of things we like because they're kind of shit, right? We're like, oh, it's kind of stupid.
I think, especially in the horror genre, if I'm being fair, there's a lot of things that are objectively not that good, but I have a lot of fun with them. This is not that.
No, this knows what it's doing, and you have that throughout. And ultimately, you have the big circle which she makes with the ghosts, and they ward out the evil, scientist, the mad scientist. And there's this little thing, and I was trying to think about this because I essentially watched the episode a second time because we usually record these on Monday and put them out on Tuesday, and we're a little bit later this week, so apologies for that. But I put it on again tonight, just sort of on. I wasn't going to sit and pay attention, but I ended up paying a lot of attention to it, a lot more than I thought it was, because it's a good show. But I was thinking about the elevator, because the elevator, of course, isn't working, and it's mentioned a couple of times where she's having, she has to get a black repairman to fix it, and she, it's hard to find, and then we have the decapitation, whatever. End of the episode, she's been interviewed by like a reporter from the newspaper talking about how she's doing something nice for the community. Her sister has moved out. Ruby has left. After the fight that she had with her, but Letty's still going through with this, and she's almost determined to prove that this is, she's still trying to do the right thing here, even if Ruby's not going to be involved.
And I'm assuming she's opened up the house to other people. Kind of the impression for free. I take it.
When she says a little bit free, but certainly affordable. Yeah. But when she says that it was inspired by her sister, she looks into the room that her sister had. It's not a small thing because obviously we didn't spend that much time there, so it's not that recognizable. But you can sort of tell by the way she's looking into it that was the room. But the elevator working, they get in the elevator to go down, and it's not exactly that big a house, so I'm like, just go down the stairs. I mean, I get it when the guys with the piano were complaining, although the piano's far too big for that elevator anyway, so I don't know why they were wanting it fixed. But they get in the elevator and they go down, and the reporters say, oh, it's such a nice thing you're doing, and blah blah. They get at the bottom and they leave, and she's like, okay, take a photo. And it's like, yeah, sure, and she smiles and takes a photo, and they walk away. The elevator goes down, and we see the dead boys in like a sort of cavern underneath the house, which
is interesting in its own right, because this feels like not just dealing with what we had, but there's more to come from this place,
possibly,
connected.
Yeah. Or at the very least, it's implying that there was a lot more victims that were just disposed of down here.
It could be just that, yeah.
Yeah, a lot of skeletons. Which I wasn't trying to figure out the last bit. Obviously, I think the last bit's just a cool little supernatural, like, hey, like, there's more creepiness, but more just, I was trying to, like, analyze the elevator thing, the idea that it wasn't working throughout, and I was kind of, my read on this, and there might be more to this that I've just not figured out yet, but my read is that it's not working at first because it's not actually her house yet. She's not in control of the house. The ghosts are in control of the house. The mad scientist still claims the house. And the idea is that at the end it works and she can control it and go down because it's now her house. Now she's in control. She's taken the control back. I don't know if there's more to it than that, but that was what I got.
I mean, I was all along those lines. So I would have assumed, or that it was more directly the ghost of the scientist that was in control, and that's why the elevator tried to attack her. He wanted her out, and by exercising that demon, that ghost, she's got that freedom now essentially, and they say there's nothing that the house isn't fighting her anymore, so she's got the home to be actually safe in, as opposed to at the start of the episode where it feels like it's out to get her.
Yeah, and I think again, if you take the house as a metaphor for society, the idea that she's carved out a place in society that's a safe haven, but it wasn't to begin with.
I think that's the interesting point is she's gone into, quote unquote, white territory, in this neighborhood, and taken some of it for herself, and has essentially expanded because she's brought other black people into this neighborhood by the end, into this house specifically. But this is a safe haven for them now in this area that they didn't have before.
And I think it's also worth mentioning she's presented with the idea, and quite a reasonable idea, just to leave because maybe it's not worth the fight. But she's determined to take something that was used to, torture and hurt black people and turn it into something that's a force for good, something that's theirs going forward. And I think the idea of taking ownership of the history and the suffering of black people and going forward and making it their own thing is kind of something that, I think we've talked about before. It's certainly something that I think comes up, and I feel like this is an example of that, or at least a metaphor for it. As if she's literally saying, no, I'm not forgetting this existed. I'm going to fight for it. I'm going to own it. And I'm going to make it mine. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's great,
the show's
isn't it?
yeah, the show's really good. This is a fantastic episode. I mean, I don't know if I'd go as far to say I like it more than the first one, but the fact that I'm even considering a possibility,
it's on par with. I'd have to think about it. I think these two are kind of head and shoulders above the second episode for me, and that's again not that the second episode was bad; it was still pretty good, but it had a lot of what I would consider standard second episode of TV show problems.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas this one, with we've talked multiple times how this subverted a lot of our expectations with what we expect from a TV show. Whereas episode 2 did feel like, okay, this is what I expect from most TV shows. This kind of, okay, it has this weaker second episode, it does these specific exposition problems. Whereas this is completely blown all those problems out of the water. They're gone.
Yeah. I should just briefly mention. Hippolyta, sorry, the comic book version. Hippolyta does have a scene with Montrose where he's kind of poking around, but it kind of shows that what Tick said to him did kind of at least get through a little bit, the idea of being present for his niece and that kind of thing. But he's there, and basically there's a scene with Hippolyta early on where she's ripping pages out of Dracula, which we know is George's favourite book, or was George's favourite book, I should say. And she's bought a new copy. There's a lot of symbolism there, like, and obviously there's nothing wrong with keeping mementos of people you've loved, but this idea that she was tarnishing it out of like kind of like pain and trying to move on, and then of course she goes and buys another copy, and she can't quite let it go, and it's that she even kind of brings this up that something's not quite right, and Montrose trying to play it cool is like, well, what do you think else do you think happened? What could have happened? And she's like, I don't know, but something doesn't feel right. And part of it's based on Tick clearly feels uncomfortable. Like there's something he feels like he's holding back. Not in a malicious way, obviously, just in he's clearly, something's eating at him.
Yeah, and I appreciate that he was self-aware enough to know that he felt out of place, because he actually said he felt wrong, living there and not telling her the truth. And obviously he was there for at least a few weeks, so it makes complete sense that she would have picked up on this.
Yeah, so there you go. That is maybe it's something will come from the Ouija board scene, because I mentioned it last week in the preview because it was the one little thing I saw, and it ended up being such a small scene in the episode, kind of to tease the supernatural stuff. But hey, maybe that other kid that Diana was with, maybe his trip will go bad, and it'll be like, no, the ghost was right.
Maybe.
I don't know. I don't know. But yeah, so there you go. That's episode 3 of Lovecraft Country. Wonderful stuff. So yeah, let us know what you thought of the episode in the comments below. Please do liking super important on YouTube. It helps us out a lot and helps us find more audience members on the interwebs. So please do hit the like button. It's free and is, in many ways the best thing you can do to actually help us out. Of course, you can also support us financially directly over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV for as little as $1 per month and help keep all the content coming and get some bonuses for your trouble, so go and have a look over there. But otherwise, that is us. So thank you once again for watching or listening. We always appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any Cthulhu?